In this lesson, we're going to add 3 more tools to our lace ground toolkit. The first tool will be creating new crossings in our pattern. The second tool will be creating 3-pair crossings. And the third tool will be moving crossings so that they have a better alignment. So for example, here I've moved a crossing from the very middle of this diamond over a little bit so that I get a straight line instead of a line with a bend in it. We'll start by adding a new crossing to our diamond net. So first, pick one of your diamond holes and identify the opposite sides. Each diagonal starts somewhere and then ends at a point. And this one starts here and ends at this point. And to create a new crossing, what we're going to do is flip it so that this red diagonal ends down here and the blue diagonal ends over here. Let's see what that looks like in an animation. So you can see that the red diagonal slowly becomes a vertical line, and the blue diagonal moves to become a horizontal line. It might be useful to track the direction that your pairs go. So it's quite obvious on the diamond net that they flow in a downward direction. In the red pair, it's fairly obvious that it's still going downward, so it points down. But on the blue pair, when we have a horizontal line, it can be confusing whether it goes from left to right or right to left. So we can easily fix that by noting that it starts here in the left corner and goes out from the left corner. So it starts on the left corner and goes out, ending on the right corner. So we could add an arrow to it showing that this pair is coming out of this crossing and coming into this crossing. Let's take a look at how we can create the familiar rose ground just by adding crossings to the diamond net. So here's our diamond net, and I'm going to first look at these 2 diamonds on this diagonal. And for each diagonal, what I'm going to do is take the southwest pointing edges and exchange their endpoints. And that gives me a cross like this, and similarly this cross. And here in my horizontal line, I'd like to know whether it's pointing left to right or right to left, so I just look at this bottom diagonal. It started on the right corner, so this one starts on the right corner and goes right to left. Now I'm going to look at the diamonds here on this opposite diagonal. And this time I'm going to use the edges that point in the southeast direction. Again, I take the endpoints and I just switch them. And this gives me a cross, and similarly this cross. And this time the bottom diagonal starts on the left-hand side, so the left corner. So this guy points left to right. And from that, I have a template that I can use to create a rose ground pattern. So down here, I've just used that pattern in the normal spreadsheet arrangement. So you can see I have rows and I have columns. And if you look at the whole pattern, you'll see the familiar rose ground. And again, remember that you can use different layouts. So I could take 3 columns and indent each column a little bit, and I'll get this arrangement. Notice that it has the squares and the square inside a diamond that we're familiar with from rose ground, but it also has a zigzag line in between the copies. And the roses, the diamonds inside a square, I'll call them roses, are spread out a little more than they are in the traditional rose ground pattern. Similarly, if I take 3 rows and indent them a little bit, I get this pattern, which has a horizontal zigzag, and the roses are spread out a little bit more. As we saw with the rose ground, there are 2 different ways that we can create this crossing. We can create it with the southwest facing edges, or we can create it with the southeast facing edges. And so I'm going to draw the southeast edges in blue and the ones created from southwest edges in red. So here I get a square hole, just as we saw in the rose ground. So anywhere you want a nice square, you just need to alternate southwest and southeast as you go around the corners. But we don't have to alternate them. We could put southeast edges on the left side and southwest edges on the right side, and we get this shape. And here we have sort of a pentagon shaped or a house shaped hole. We also don't have to put a crossing at every corner. Here I've just put a crossing in one corner, and I also get a pentagon hole, but it's a little bit smaller. Here I have used the southwest edges to create my crossings at all 4 of these corners. And what I get is a hexagonal hole in the middle. Also get this nice arrangement of vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines. It's similar to looking to the Paris ground, but it's tilted a little bit. And if I take this pattern and I look at these 2 edges that are on opposite sides of this hole, and I make a crossing out of them, I get this pattern. And this is like a small cloth motif. So I have 3 passives, and I have a weaver that goes back and forth 3 times. So you can see that you can get quite a variety of different hole shapes and even filled shapes using these crosses. We can make crossings in holes that are diamond shaped, but we can also create crossings in other shaped holes. So for example, like this hexagon. And that should make sense because that is actually how we created this hexagon hole in the first place. There was a crossing here that we removed. So if we wanted to create a crossing in the hexagon again, we would just take these vertical edges, take their endpoints, and swap them, and that would give us our cross. So you can make crosses in holes of any shape. There's just something to keep an eye on. So I'm going to label all of the pairs with arrows showing the direction that they flow in. And now what we'll see is that every hole has a crossing like this one where we have 2 outgoing pairs. I'm going to call that F for first because that's actually the first stitch that we make that is in the creation of this hole. So that would be our first stitch. And there's also a crossing like this one where we have 2 incoming pairs. And this is the stitch where we would close our hole. So I'm going to call that L for the last stitch for closing the hole. And then we can see from the first to the last, along the left side of the hole, we have pairs that all point in the same direction. And along the right side of the hole, we have all these pairs pointing in this direction. So we have a left side and a right side. And as long as one edge comes from the left side and one edge comes from the right side, we can swap their endpoints. So for example, here's a purple pair that's on the left side of the hole, and here's another purple pair that's on the right side of the hole, and we can swap their endpoints. So here are their endpoints, and let's swap them. So this diagonal, it's going to start here at F, and it's going to go all the way to the endpoint of this purple pair, which is L. So that's going to give us this vertical line. And this diagonal pair, it starts here in the bottom right, and it goes up here towards the end of this other diagonal pair. So it goes actually up like this. Now it's useful to put arrows on this pair, or these 2 pairs, because they're not pointed in the traditional direction. So we're used to pairs that point down, and these ones are pointing up. It is still workable, and there is no problem with working the lace. You just have to be conscious that you're working in an upward direction. So when you're working this lace, you'd have done this stitch and this stitch, and then you would come to work this stitch, and that's fine, that pair's going down. So you would work this one, and then you have your pairs ready to work this one, and then finally you have your pairs ready to work this stitch. Okay, so the working order is maybe a little counterintuitive because you're going in an upward direction, but it's actually perfectly workable. And perhaps if you're looking for an unusual aesthetic, this non-traditional flow of pairs might be just what you're looking for. And of course we can arrange these this template in different ways. So here are 3 different ways using the spreadsheet: indenting columns and indenting rows. And you see different features pop out. So here we have a hexagon with a cross through it and vertical lines. Here we still have the vertical lines, but the hexagon's gone. Instead we have this kind of eye-shaped arrangement. And in here we have the hexagons with the crosses, but instead of being in columns, they're on the diagonal. And these vertical lines have disappeared. So now we're going to look at creating a 3-pair crossing. Ordinarily, we just have 2 incoming pairs that make a stitch and then 2 outgoing pairs. But in a 3-pair crossing, we have 3 incoming pairs that do some kind of stitch and 3 outgoing pairs. And there's many ways that you can do that stitch. For example, in Practical Skills in Bobbin Lace by Bridget M. Cook, in her chapter on connections and crossings, she gives a variety of ways that you can interweave your 3 pairs. And in addition to what she shows here, there are also windmill crossings. So let's look at how to create one of these 3-pair crossings. So we'll start with a triangle. So here, for example, I have a diamond net, and I've removed one of the crossings to create this hexagonal hole. And on each side of the hexagonal hole, I have a triangle. So let's just look at a triangle. So the triangle has 3 sides, and it also has 3 incoming pairs. And it has 3 outgoing pairs. So we're going to turn this triangle into a 3-pair crossing. One way to think of it would be just to shrink this triangle down smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just a dot or a single stitch. Another way to think about it is we have these 3 starting points for our 3 incoming pairs. We have these 3 ending points for our 3 outgoing pairs. And I'm just going to label them 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3 in clockwise direction. And now I'm just going to connect 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and 3 to 3. So here I have 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and 3 to 3. And that gives us our 3-pair crossing here. Now notice in this example it worked out very nicely that the lines actually crossed each other at a single point. Sometimes you may have to bend one of your lines in order to get that crossing to happen. And here's just a little example where I've taken these 2 triangles and turned each of them into a 3-pair crossing, and then I can create this lace ground. So I've created 3 rows of the pattern and indented each row a little bit. Now I get this shape. So notice we have these 3-pair crossings as well as 2-pair crossings. We'll also find these triangle shapes when we create crosses as we did for the rose ground. So here I'm going to look at 4 different examples of triangles and how they work. So starting with this blue triangle. If we look at the blue triangle and identify the incoming pairs for that triangle, notice that all 3 of these incoming pairs are part of the border. And here, one of the outgoing pairs is also part of the border. Now we can't modify the border edges. They're done in marker and we can't erase them, and that's for good reason. So this particular triangle, we cannot turn that into a 3-pair crossing because we can't change the edges coming into it. Now let's take a look at this second triangle, the yellow one. Look at its incoming pairs. Those all look very good. They have different starting points. But if we look at the outgoing pairs, this one's fine, but these 2 outgoing pairs meet at one point. And that's a problem because we actually want those lines to cross inside the triangle, not here at the outside. So we can't create a simple 3-pair crossing if we have this situation where the outgoing pairs meet at a point. And similarly with this green triangle, here the outgoing pairs are fine, but we find that the incoming pairs meet at a point. So that's a problem. However, this fourth pink triangle, this one we can do. So if we look at this triangle, our incoming pairs look like this, and they all start at different places, and our outgoing pairs are here, and they all end at different places, so nothing is being meeting at a point. And so we can do the same thing we did before with the hexagon example. Just label our lines in clockwise order 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, and 3 goes to 3. And that gives us this arrangement. Now with the yellow and green triangles, all is not lost. We could think about them as a square with a line through it. And now you can imagine if you were to shrink that square smaller and smaller until it was a dot, then we could do a 3-pair crossing, because we have 3 incoming pairs coming into the square and 3 pairs going out of the square. So we can do the same thing here by just labeling them 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and connecting the numbers together to get this 3-pair crossing. And if you're an ambitious lace maker, you might notice here what you could have done is have your 3 pairs come in, and then 1 pair goes out and 2 pairs are plaited together and come to this point. So it's not impossible to work this, it's just not your typical 3-pair crossing. The last tool we're going to look at is moving a crossing. So that is taking some kind of crossing that you have and just moving its position. So for example, I can take this crossing here and push it down until it moves all the way down here. So I've changed the appearance of it by pushing it around. And for example, that could give me a lace ground pattern that looks like this. Important things to keep in mind. So take, for example, this crossing, which I've marked with a dot. You can move it anywhere inside the blue area. And the blue area is just the holes that are around that crossing. Notice that I'm not moving it outside of the holes, so I'm not introducing a new crossing by making these lines cross over any of the lines on the boundary here. I'm just moving it inside the holes that are around it. I also need to be careful around the border of our frame. I don't want to move an intersection all the way out into the corner here of the border, because if I do that, I end up with the possibility that this line will cross over some line that's on the left-hand side. So for example, say this had been a vertical line here, and I move this line, this crossing all the way out into the red area. Now I've got the crossing coming out over that vertical line and coming back. So we don't want to move into the red borders. And I've colored it here for option 1 and also for option 2. And you'll notice that the white area inside makes a rectangle, and that's where we want to stay. Let's take a little closer look at those border areas because they're kind of special. So for example, here I have a crossing that's at the left side of my border, or it could have been at the right side. And imagine I push it all the way up, so it's just lying on that red triangle. So I have a vertical line. So I've just pushed it to the left, giving me this vertical line. And now imagine that my pattern also has a vertical line on the right-hand side. So I have 2 vertical lines. Now in arrangements where those vertical lines don't overlap, I don't have any problem. Things go smoothly. Where you have to be careful is where those vertical lines overlap. Okay? Now here I have 2 pairs coming in and a 3rd pair coming in diagonally, and then a pair going out and 2 pairs. So this is a 3-pair crossing, and it's a little bit unbalanced because I have 2 pairs that are vertical and I have 1 pair coming in and going out. It is not impossible to work this. You can make a plait and a 3-pair crossing and a plait with a pair coming out. It's a little bit trickier though, so if you're just starting out, maybe this is a pattern to avoid. Similarly, if I do this on the top and the bottom, so here I'm just going to push a crossing up to the top and a crossing down to the bottom, giving me this horizontal line at the bottom and a horizontal line at the top. So again, if I stagger my horizontal lines in my layout, I have no problem. That's easy to work. The problem happens when those two horizontal lines overlap. So now I have a pair coming in, and then I have a pair that goes out and back, and it intersects with a pair coming down. And similarly on the right hand side. So this gets a little complicated because we have the pair that goes out and a pair that comes back. That can't be worked as a plait or a tally because the two arrows are going in the opposite direction. So we have a fairly complicated crossing going on here, and there's the same thing happening on the other side. So this arrangement is fairly complicated, so again, it's not impossible, but it's not something that I would recommend for someone just starting out. So it's best to try and avoid having a horizontal line at the top and the bottom. You can move more than one crossing at the same time. So here, for example, I have a pattern where I have a line here that I've highlighted in purple, and it has two bends in it. And I think it might be nicer if it was just a straight line. So I'm looking at these 5 crossings here on the left, and I want to move them all, some to the right and some to the left. That's not a problem, so I can just identify the beginning and the end that I want and connect those with a straight line. So I've replaced that whole purple line on the left with this straight line here. And I can do the same thing on the right. So I can see that I still have the 5 crossings that I started out with. They're just moved, some to the left and some to the right. And this gives me this kind of Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass window ground effect. So you don't have to move just one at a time. You could look for different lines that you want to emphasize and move several crossings at the same time. All right, now let's see what that looks like in practice. The first thing I'm going to try is creating a new crossing. So we need to pick the 2 opposite sides that we're going to turn into the vertical and horizontal lines. So let's say we pick the southwest lines. So I'll start by erasing those 2 lines. And now that they're erased, I can just draw in the vertical and horizontal lines. Maybe touch up the other lines so that they're still visible. Okay, so that is my new crossing. To create a 3-way crossing, the first thing to do is choose your triangle. So let's say I'm going to turn this triangle here into a 3-way crossing. What I'll do is first mark the beginning of the pairs coming into this crossing. So there are 3 pairs coming in, and I'm going to use a mechanical pencil so it makes a smaller mark. So here's one incoming pair. I'll mark that with a circle. The second, and here's the third. And I'll do the same for the ends of the outgoing pairs. So here's one outgoing pair, here's another one, and here's the third. All right, now I'm going to carefully erase all of the triangle and those 6 lines coming into and out of the triangle. And fix up ones that I might have slightly erased. Okay, so now I'm going to connect a line between the first incoming start to the first outgoing end, the second incoming to the second outgoing, and the third incoming to the third outgoing. Okay. And I'll do the same with this hexagon example. So let's say I'm going to turn this triangle into a 3-pair crossing. So I look at the incoming edges and I put a circle around the beginning of the incoming edges, and the outgoing edges, a circle around the end of the outgoing edges. And then I'll erase everything carefully in the middle. And now draw a line between the first incoming and the first outgoing, the second incoming and the second outgoing, and the third incoming and the third outgoing. All right, moving crossings gets a little bit more tricky because it's harder to erase everything. So let's say I want to take this crossing and move it down to here. So what I want to do is maybe make a little circle around the beginning and the end points and mark where I want to move them to. And now erase the crossing that I want to move. And now draw the lines again. So the beginning point comes to the new location for the crossing and then back to its ending point. And the same, this beginning comes to the crossing and goes to the ending point. As you can see, when you're moving crossings, it's a little more difficult to erase and move things around. So for this example, where I want to take this bent line here, so I'll just kind of put a little squiggle on it so you can see the line that I want to move. I want to move that line and its partner here on the other side. It will get a little messy if I try to erase all of that without destroying the other lines and then draw the new lines in. So what I recommend instead is that you trace the lines that you are not going to change, so the lines that are not moving, and then mark your beginning and ending points, and then just draw in your new lines. You might like this strategy for some of the other techniques as well. Just retrace the parts that don't change rather than erasing them. It's a little bit tidier. You don't end up with all the smudge marks. It's just a little bit more time consuming. But definitely when you're moving a large number of intersections, I recommend just redrawing what's not changing and then draw in the changed parts. Okay, now it's your turn to play with these ideas. So take some of your templates, your diamond nets, and start creating crossings and 3-pair crossings and moving edges around. Keep an open mind, look for creative ways to design your grounds, and even if you don't like something, don't throw it out right away. In the next lesson, we're going to look at symmetry, and you might find that even things that look odd have beautiful results. So be creative and have fun.